Hey, BloodStream listeners, co-host Patrick James Lynch here, and I just want to thank you all for an amazing year one of the BloodStream podcast. The pod has received over 5,400 listens in its first year and has spawned a greater network of podcasts for the bleeding disorders community through the BloodStream Media Network. So thank you for your listenership and support. And here's to kicking off a great year two. Also, the BloodStream podcast is made possible by the generous support of Shire. We thank them for their commitment to our producing engaging and educational new media content, and we look forward to continuing to grow the podcast with their support. Thank you, Shire. All right, on to the show. Hello, and welcome to BloodStream, episode 13, June 19th, 2017. I'm Patrick James Lynch.
And I'm Natalie Lynch.
And on this episode, we'll discuss a recent study highlighting the issue of patient aging, a story about a young Iowan with hemophilia whose healthcare costs recently made waves in national media, and the latest on the American Health Care Act, or Trump Care, and its growing likelihood of making its way out of the Senate, and what you can do to stop that from happening. All of that, plus Natalie and I sit down for an in-person interview of Believe Limited's own Rob Bradford, who just got back from spending 47 nights at Mount Everest Base Camp, filming and managing footage for Bombardier Blood, the documentary on Chris Bombardier's historic summiting of Mount Everest. That and more coming up on this episode. Welcome to BloodStream. All right. Natalie Lynch, how are you?
I'm wonderful.
How's that sound?
I'm married.
Yeah, you're married to me.
I'm married to you.
We should specify. It went as planned. We married each other. There was no last minute weird things.
No, it went as planned. It went better than planned, actually.
It did go better than planned. It went a lot better than planned.
It turned into a 14-hour wedding day with epic dancing and
epic dance. That word gets used a little too often, but I don't mind in this context. It's accurate. Epic dance party.
Yeah, it was so much fun.
Tell everybody though how the night truly ended for us, because that was a particularly fun highlight for me.
I think it was a little after 3 a.m. I'm trying to talk to the staff who mostly spoke Portuguese, which I didn't even realize because they were so warm the whole time. I didn't know.
Should mention we got married in Portugal. That's why. It's not like it was here in Los Angeles and we just found this really quaint corner. That was in Portugal. So go ahead.
I didn't know till the end of the night that they didn't know what I was saying to them the entire night until I tried to ask for ice. And they were like, what? I'm like, I need ice for my husband.
So I'm sitting outside chatting with people, doing the wow, this was an amazing, crazy day and wedding. And out on the balcony, again, 3 a.m. with a bucket of ice is Natalie in her dress, still in full wedding mode, but she's presenting me with a bucket of ice. And I was like, what's this for? She was like, for you to ice.
Time to infuse.
Like, oh, well, hemo wife. My hemo wife has started. She has started her activities, and so that was what we did. We iced and put feet up the wall and infused a second time because I took my shot that morning. Actually, I didn't tell you this, but I took a photo just before, I was dressed, I had everything ready to go, and then I was like, okay, now I got to infuse. The last thing I got to do is infuse before this crazy long day begins. And I set up a little photo, and I took a photo and was going to post that as a, when you got the tie on and the cufflinks in and the vows written and you just got to infuse. But then I just decided not to because I was like, don't make it about, I just decided not to. But that did go through my head. And then at the end of the day, you made sure that we capped it off in a hemo-appropriate fashion as well.
I feel like most newlyweds have a romantic end of the wedding. Not that ours wasn't romantic, but it infused.
Oh, buckets of ice, getting the bed all wet, you're sticking needles in my veins. We've been up for 100,000 hours. Yeah, no, it was very romantic. I have to agree.
No, it was wonderful. But I'm glad to be back, and I'm glad to be doing this, and having a little routine. Yeah,
me too. And we got a lot to talk about.
We do.
Couple pieces of housekeeping just before we get into the meat of the episode. A few episodes back, I had mentioned that the My Life, Our Future program, their research repository was now opened, and had mentioned wanting to do a piece on that. That has been moved firmly from the I want to do this soon to the I hope to do this at some point, maybe wish list, because time is a very tough thing to deal with sometimes. So instead, I want to draw your attention to the HemoWare magazine, and that's NHF's magazine. It's published quarterly, both in print and digitally. The spring 2017 issue has done a piece on My Life, Our Future, pointing out some of the highlights of the program to date, explaining what it's all about and where we go from here with it. So if you are interested to know more about My Life, Our Future, I would direct you to go to hemaware.org. That's HEMAWARE.org. Or hemaware.org/n-espanol for the Spanish language version, where you can read more about My Life, Our Future. Likewise, also have mentioned before, I want to do a piece on clinical trials, but unfortunately that too, just bandwidth and what it takes to actually put together a very well-researched segment for this with interviews and the like. It's a lot, and I'm pretty spread thin right now. So instead, I want to point to resources that can give you more information on these topics. For the clinical trials piece, there's a link in the program notes to NHF's Steps for Living platform, and it includes a link specifically to where you can find information about clinical trials on that platform if you want to read more about what clinical trials entail, what one should be thinking about if they want to consider enrolling in a clinical trial, and where to go for even more information about trials and how they come together. So those two pieces of business out of the way, two segments I was hoping to include here on BloodStream at some point, but I think instead I have to point you in the direction of other people who are creating educational and informative content. Few updates on BloodStream Media. We've had a few new podcasts come out since we last talked to you. There's a new episode of the Ask the Expert series featuring Dr. Robert Sidonio, who is an expert on women with bleeding disorders and runs a clinic out of Atlanta, Georgia. And we speak about women with bleeding disorders. So you can check that out, the latest episode of Ask the Expert. New episode of the Powering Through podcast featuring community members Sean Whelan and Maria Perez and comedian Greg Edwards, talking about personal adversity, care and management challenges that are specific to certain cultures, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And I want to make another plug for the Bloodline 3-episode special series on von Willebrand disease, featuring patient and clinician stories about living with von Willebrand disease in the United States and abroad. That series, the latest episode of the Powering Through podcast, and the latest episode of the Ask the Expert series can all be found at bloodstreammedia.com. If you want to suggest a topic for a future BloodStream Media podcast, whether it's this one, the BloodStream podcast, or something for Ask the Expert, perhaps you have an idea for a Bloodline series, a deep dive into a certain topic, let us know. You can email us info@bloodstreammedia.com, hit us up on Twitter @bloodstreaminfo, or connect with us on Facebook, facebook.com/bloodstreammedia. Likewise, if you enjoy this podcast, if you like listening to it, please subscribe to it. You'll get episodes delivered right to you on your podcast player of choice. And if you have the time, iTunes reviews go a long way to helping other people find the podcast. So even if you're not subscribed to us on iTunes, if you have an Apple ID, which my guess is, 75% or more of you do, it would be very helpful for you to leave us a review on iTunes. Just look up the BloodStream podcast. And lastly, but certainly not leastly, we are, at the time that we are releasing this, just one episode away from the end of Season 7 of Stop the Bleeding.
Boo.
Yeah, boo indeed. It has flown by. I can't believe how quickly it happened. This has been such a whirlwind of a year.
I feel like you were just filming.
Me too. Me too. So yes, this 10-episode season is winding down, and if you haven't seen any of it yet, first of all, what are you doing? But second of all, Season 7 has featured episodes on World Hemophilia Day and the global community, insurance and advocacy, prophylaxis, an introduction to HTCs, dating and disclosure, inhibitors, mental health, being diagnosed with von Willebrand disease, and chapter community relationships. All of those episodes are already out, and 1 week from Tuesday, they'll all be out. And they'll all be available at stbhemo.com, where you can also find, and I really want to make sure that people know about these, because these are tools that I think can be very helpful, especially for chapters, for family education days or symposiums, for teen programming. We have workbooks that we've made available that seek to underscore the educational messages of the episode for the teens and young audience that we have. So, for example, in the episode on prophylaxis, we will call back moments from the episode, and the workbooks tee up questions about the importance of prophylaxis, what people notice characters in the show doing that are both good and bad, examples of self-care, and things of that sort. The workbooks are free and downloadable from stbhemo.com. You'll find the corresponding chapters underneath each episode's YouTube link. So stbhemo.com for all things Stop the Bleeding, which again comes to a close 1 week from tomorrow. Do you think they're going to know I did that, or do you think they'll think it's an effect?
I think they're going to know.
They're going to know?
Yeah.
Okay. Kicking off our like, share, comment segment this month, we have a like story that was published in Hemophilia News today. The story is, it's really a recap of a review recently published in the European Journal of Internal Medicine, published at the end of last month, titled Progress in the Contemporary Management of Hemophilia, the New Issue of Patient Aging. And yes, the new issue of patient aging, because as the article points out, something of a sober reality that decades ago, most people with hemophilia died young, and my obligatory reminder that is still the case for 75% of the world. Currently, though, in America and in the developed world with hemophilia, we are expected to live on average with the general population, which is exciting for all the obvious reasons, but it does mean, well, two things. One, that we, just like anyone else in the general population, are subject to aging-related health challenges that our population on a whole hasn't necessarily engaged with before. And two, that we, as a result of our hemophilia and damage done by our hemophilia, are going to be subject to aging-related health challenges that are specific to our community, but we might not yet have a good grasp on because we just haven't seen enough people with hemophilia age into those later years. The article points out some of the challenges faced by people with hemophilia as they age: musculoskeletal problems, of course, cardiovascular disease, viral infections for those who have been impacted by things such as the blood contamination crisis, chronic kidney disease, chronic pain, and more. The landing place of both the article and the review, which is available to read online, is that the multidisciplinary integrated approach to care is best, which is the model followed by hemophilia treatment centers, that integrated approach to care, bringing together specialists who are expert in hemophilia to work collaboratively with the patient on deciding upon the best treatment plan. So we kind of know that is the best model, and I guess the article and the review reinforced that with all the known unknowns that we are going to be facing with an aging population, the more collaboratively and the more comprehensively we are working together, the better. I bring this article up because it doesn't necessarily point out anything new. It says that the HTC model is best for aging patients. Okay, I probably could have figured that, and that's not to denigrate the research in any way, but that's not an extraordinary conclusion to reach. But I bring it up because as we raise more and more attention for things like hemophilia in the developing world, women with bleeding disorders, inhibitors, the needs of people for whom English isn't their first language in the United States, as we identify all the different subsections of our population and their unique needs, it is important to remember that your average guy with hemophilia who's approaching middle age, who's approaching senior years, they have a lot of unknowns ahead of them, and we need to make sure that we are keeping them in mind both at a chapter and community level, as well as at a clinical and research level, because their needs are important too. There's a link to the article in the program notes, and again, you can find it if you go to Hemophilia News today as well, and take a look at patient aging, or search for patient aging. And now with our share segment, Natalie's going to share a story that I saw was circulating a bit through our social media channels, but haven't had a chance to look at. So I'm curious to hear a little bit more about it and to learn along with our listeners. So go ahead and take it away, Natalie.
It was a May 31st article by USA Today titled, "Iowa Teens' $1 Million per month illness is no longer a secret." In the article, Wellmark's Blue Cross Blue Shield, which is Iowa's largest healthcare insurer, was saying that a single member's bill was the cause for fast raising premiums among tens of thousands of other Iowans. The specific example was a teen with hemophilia costing $1 million a month. Laura Jackson, the executive vice president, used this to highlight an example in which one person costs drive up others' premiums, which led to the decision of Wellmark to stop offering such policies next year. The two second largest, Aetna and Medica, have made other decisions very similar, or have at least announced considering making those decisions. And I'm sure that's because they don't want to take on the patients that would then come to them.
Sure.
and have higher costs. Katie Verb, Director of Policy of Government Relations at HFA, said that $1 million a month is something that we've never heard of, that it's, a very, very large cost.
It's extraordinarily high, even with hemophilia, even if you have an inhibitor, even if you're tolerizing, that is a huge cost.
Yeah. And then Michelle Rice, a vice president at NHF, told USA Today that she could imagine a case in which that could possibly cost that much per month if there was an inhibitor or...
Yeah, it's still implausible, but like literally is it conceptual?
Possible?
Yeah, sure.
I think a lot of people got riled up both within the community because there were some nasty comments said from people outside of the community who are subject to potentially having a health problem at any time. No one's immune to that. And, weren't very sensitive to someone costing
comments
a lot.
Just on like the website or something in the comment box?
And this article led to other articles from publications such as Teen Vogue, who also talked about what was going on specifically with this teen in Iowa.
It just strikes me as it's so easy to point to one extreme example of anything and then use that to build a case about an existing problem and say, well, it's really this one big thing over here that's causing all these problems for all of us over here. Obviously, somebody who's costing an insurance company $12 million a year, again, astronomically high, but we as people with hemophilia aren't denying that we're costly patients. We absolutely are. That's particularly costly, but we can let that be. It's very easy to point to that person over there and say, look, this is the problem. This is the reason. The system's failed, so we've got to pull out and move on. And then, as you mentioned once, and we see this, and Michelle Rice, I've heard her talk about this multiple times, when certain companies make a decision, such as pulling out of a market, it sets a trend for other companies, in part because, as you pointed out, they don't want to take on the burden of those costly patients. And, guys that we work with at Believe who are part of what we do, who don't, I was talking to somebody, independent contractor the other day, who was like, it's just cheaper for me to pay out of pocket and then take the little penalty that I have to face rather than absorb the premiums because I'm a generally healthy person. That's a POV that's very hard to combat. It makes plenty of sense, and it's one of the symptoms of a system that is designed to provide as close to universal coverage as possible without being a universal healthcare system, because we still allow 1/6 of our economy to be driven by the healthcare system. The problem is the profit-oriented model of a healthcare system, as opposed to a problem of a universal healthcare system. Nothing's going to be problemless, but this is an existing problem. And what kind of ticks me off, frankly, about the way, at least in the review here, that the information's communicated, is that it really seems to position this secret, expensive Iowa teen with hemophilia as the problem. People with chronic diseases aren't the problem.
I'm not sure that the article explicitly
But then if we're following up with Katie Verb about how much does that person cost,
right,
and Michelle, how much does that person cost, and the insurance commissioner, that's where I feel like we're actually getting to the root of the thing. But it sounds like, based on the structure of this, that was buried deep inside the article. They used the salaciousness of very expensive person. Now they're all pulling out. And what's the conclusion that the average person reading it is going to draw? That's bothersome to me, not only because of this article, but because it feels like every freaking time hemophilia is mentioned in an article or talked about on television, it's in some negative light, some negative connotation with misinformation. And it's annoying.
Clearly, the system is flawed.
The Affordable Care Act has done incredible things, absolutely incredible things, imperfect system. But since the Trump administration took office and the Republican Party holds all three branches of government, the support for the Affordable Care Act, which is our current system here in the United States, Speaker Ryan said as much when their first attempt at a Trump care bill failed. Obamacare is the law of the land. It is still the law of the land. But there are no longer ads being run to support people enrolling in it. There are no longer efforts being put into making sure that it is successful. So when Donald Twitter Trump says things like, well, it's failing, it's miserable, it's a disaster, it's collapsing, yeah, in part you're doing absolutely nothing to help it because you're driven by an agenda that is repeal and replace, and you would rather see these companies pull out, and USA Today write an article that blames hemophiliacs, than actually do something to solve the existing problem while you work secretly behind closed doors to present the horrendous bill that you've been working on. It is a very frustrating time to be a person with an expensive chronic disease, and we need the media and articles to help us and not hurt us on this. And in general, they are. It's just this is particularly bothersome to me.
Well, I mean, the article did highlight too that the ACA, that the hemophilia community definitely benefits from protections on pre-existing conditions and lifetime caps, and that those things are important for people in the hemophilia community as well as other people with chronic conditions. But
all of which are in jeopardy with where we're going.
100%, and I agree with you. And something's got to give.
All right, and now for that comment piece, our last here of this section, to talk a little bit about the American Health Care Act, or Trump Care. Generally, I try to avoid speaking about politics on the podcast. I would generally think that it's not appropriate, but we are living in extraordinarily strange times, and healthcare is perhaps the largest policy issue that we as Americans are facing right now in this new political climate. And I'm going to speak a little bit more bluntly, and this is just my opinion. Well, some of it's my, let's call it
mine too.
Yeah, let's call it opinion, and then you're welcome to do your own homework to make your own decisions. So, as we touched upon in the previous segment, the Affordable Care Act is currently in jeopardy of being repealed and replaced. If you haven't been following along, there was one attempt that failed in the House. There was a second attempt at a repeal and replace effort. The bill in the House flew through the House, the Republican-held House, despite no Congressional Budget Office score, despite a whole host of flaws, and then there was a Rose Garden celebration with beer drinking, literally, at just getting a bill out of the House when you have control of the House, and that shouldn't be hard to begin with. It went on to the Senate. We were hopeful that it would just fail in the Senate because it's a miserable bill. But unfortunately, the Senate is led by a miserable person who is extraordinarily good at his terrible job. So Mitch McConnell is rallying great support in the Senate for a revised version of the American Health Care Act that's currently being written by 13 men in one room behind closed doors. Just to point out, this is from the party that criticized the Obama administration for just rushing Obamacare right through all of its due process. Obamacare was privy to 80 days of debate in the Senate. The Senate is trying to get this bill drafted, scored, all of which without one hearing, and out of the Senate by July 4th. That's the party that said the Obama administration rushed Obamacare. But I want to talk a little about what should we be looking for? What's actually an indicator that this may or may not pass, and what do we do about that? So in order to talk about that, we've got to identify who the key players are. There are currently 52 senators who are Republican and 48 who are Democratic, or who caucus with the Democrats. Of those, here are the people that you should be aware of. Susan Collins, a senator from Maine, a Republican senator from Maine. She has been a pretty ardent, in ardent opposition of the ACHA. So she's an expected no when it comes to the Senate floor, although we don't know that for sure. And Rand Paul, the kind of outlier senator, him and his libertarian views, while Susan Collins finds the bill to be too conservative, Rand Paul finds them to be not conservative enough. Couldn't disagree more on his philosophy, but I'm appreciative that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So those two senators are believed to be a no, which puts the Republican Party at 50 Republican senators who could be a yes. And if it's a 50-50 tie in the Senate, the tie-breaking vote goes to Vice President Pence, who will be a yes. So if Collins and Paul are no's, we need, and I say we as people who care about the health care rights of every American citizen, we need at least one more no. And here are some of the people to be thinking about sending emails to or tweeting at, showing up their offices to let them know how you feel about people with pre-existing conditions having no legal protection in the insurance market. Rob Portman, a senator from Ohio, Cory Gardner, senator from Colorado, and Shelley Moore-Pita, senator from West Virginia. All three of those states, West Virginia, Colorado, and Ohio, they accepted big Medicaid expansions. And one of the things that this bill proposes to do as a cost savings effort is to gut Medicaid spending. So there's belief that senators from states, even Republican senators from states, with big Medicaid expansions would be slow to sign on to this bill. But unfortunately, all three of the aforementioned senators have indicated that they are in support of this bill now that there's a slower phase out of Medicaid spending, i.e. they may not be in office any longer and don't need to worry about re-election. If we look at some traditionally purple states, the states that are a little bit more balanced in terms of their red-blue makeup, Dean Heller from Nevada, Jeff Flake from Arizona, both of them are up for re-election in 2018, so probably feeling the pressure a bit more than some of their colleagues. Dean Heller was for a very long time believed to be a no for this bill, but has indicated now that he is in support of the bill. Jeff Flake, in the research that I was doing, hasn't said anything too definitive, but at this point, that to me indicates a yes more than it indicates a no. So we should not feel confident that either of our senators here from these purple states are going to, of their own accord, be our ally. And lastly, this was interesting. Alaska, represented in the Senate by Lisa Murkowski and Dan Sullivan, they also took large Medicaid expansion. And Alaska has the highest healthcare costs in the nation, which I did not realize. I don't know why that is, but evidently that is true based on research that I've done, and that's just interesting to me. So they're kind of in a special circumstance, and you could, again, the same logic that I mentioned earlier, you could believe that because of the high Medicaid expansion and their high healthcare costs, that they would be inclined to not support a bill that was going to gut Medicaid. However, there's some in the DC circles who believe that if it came down to one or either of their votes, that something could be written into the bill that would specifically protect Alaska and therefore may win them over to the yes side of things. So, if you are from the states of Maine, Ohio, Colorado, West Virginia, Alaska, any of the aforementioned states, if you are represented by any of those senators, this is as good a time as ever to make phone calls to their office, which leads me into the what can we do now. Don't underestimate the power of the phone calls. They go a very long way. If you would like, the Capitol switchboard phone number is 202-224-3121. That will help connect you to anyone in either House, the Senate, or the Congress that you would like to speak to, 202-224-3121. Call as often as you can. Call every day. Call often. And Ben Wickler from MoveOn.org suggests when you call, don't just register your opinion, but actually ask for the health legislative assistant. That's the individual in that office specifically charged with being eyes and ears for constituents on this issue, the health legislative assistant in your senator's office. Go online, go on Facebook, look up what friends you have in these states and ask them to call their senators and implore them to vote no on this bill, or at the very least implore them to push for a little bit of transparency. Go to your local office. NHF recently did a Back to DC Day. National Advocacy Days, Washington Days took place a couple of months ago, but given the extraordinary time we're living in, NHF went back to DC just a couple weeks ago, which is fantastic. But don't just wait for either national or state organized days. Just go. Just show up. Take photos of yourself there. Take video, post it online. Ask friends to share it. The more noise and pressure that we are going to make in the next couple weeks especially, then the better. Because right now, unfortunately, of its own accord, we're in trouble. If this actually happens, there's not protections for people with pre-existing conditions. There are not protections for adequate care for women's health. There are not protections for the most infirmed and most in need in our country. And if we like to think of ourselves as the greatest country in the world, if we can't take care of our own people, we have no right to say something as extraordinary as that. And with that, I will end my healthcare political rant. I hope that comment piece got you revved up and ready to advocate. We are all going to need to do our part to ensure adequate healthcare for our community going forward. And speaking of doing our part, allow me to do mine as the host by thanking our sponsor, Shire, for their ongoing support of the BloodStream podcast. Thank you, Shire. We could not do it without you. And now, my and Natalie's interview with Believe's own Rob Bradford on his experience living at Mount Everest Base Camp, filming Chris Bombardier for Believe Limited's documentary of Chris's historic climb, and his experience with the bleeding disorders community both here in the United States and abroad over the last number of years. Let's give it a listen. So we're here on a very special sit-down segment with none other than Believe Limited's own Rob Bradford. Welcome, Rob.
Hi, thank you.
Welcome.
One thing we haven't talked about at all in this episode is actually the biggest story of the last 30 days, which was that Chris Bombardier, the 31-year-old mountaineer with severe hemophilia B, has successfully summited Mount Everest and become the first person with severe hemophilia, to summit Mount Everest. And we've talked about it a fair amount on the podcast because we're making this documentary about him. And we've kind of been, you had talked with me, Natalie, about coming back from Nepal a little while back. But Rob was actually on the mountain with Chris for the entirety. What was it, 47 nights you slept at base camp?
Yeah, 46 nights, 47 days, yeah.
46 nights, 47 days.
Not that I was counting.
Did the trek up there and was the only person from Believe on the mountain responsible for capturing footage, storing the footage, organizing the footage, and getting it back from Mount Everest. So certainly a unique and anxiety-filled task for Rob that we wanted to talk with him here about.
Yeah, anxiety being the keyword. That was yeah.
Additionally, I think, Rob has an interesting perspective because he has been working, and we're going to get into this in just a moment here, but bird's eye view, Rob does not have a bleeding disorder. Rob is a producer and really an entertainment Swiss Army knife that's been working with Believe in one way or another for many years and full-time now for 2+.
2+.
And has gotten to know the community very well. In fact, just a few months ago, we did a little trivia game with our various writers and producers just to get people's brains kind of thinking creatively and in a fun way about hemophilia and VWD before some assignments. And every question that was asked, Rob's hand goes right up and he gives the perfect answer. And he's been fully onboarded to this community and is officially an adopted member of the bleeding disorders community.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to think of myself as an unaffected sibling.
I think that's pretty accurate in more ways than one.
Not many of our listeners, if any, have spent any time at base camp. So, you were there for 47 days.
Yeah.
You are a base camp expert.
That's actually true. I can't say with a lot of certainty. I feel like an expert on base camp at this point.
So before we get there, let's just go back a little bit. I had mentioned earlier your various you have many proficiencies in film and in entertainment in general. How did you get started in film and entertainment?
My interest started when I was a kid. I used to be able to watch PG-13 and sometimes approved R-rated movies when I was very young because my dad liked Westerns and sci-fi thrillers and stuff like that. So as long as it was Alien, I could watch it at 5 years old, but if it had some sort of R-rated material but wasn't a sci-fi thriller or wasn't a classic Western, then I wasn't allowed to watch it. And so I grew up watching those kind of movies and was really always wanting to be a part. And originally I thought that was going to be acting. And when I was a kid, I started acting and actually dancing as well in high school and went on to major in it in college. And then in college, I took some directing and film classes where we also in the film class would be acting on film, but we'd be behind the camera as well and operating the stuff. And I liked doing that a lot because I've just been always kind of like a technology geek. I was really into ham radios as a kid, which I don't even think some people know what they are. But and this kind of naturally translated. I was working with the cameras and playing with them, and I noticed I liked doing that, and it helped me when I first moved to New York, kind of make my own sketches and little dumb videos that I will show no one now. But I was really proud of them at the time, and when I met my boss and your partner Ryan Gielen about exactly 10 years ago, in fact, we worked together, me as an actor, him as a director, and I started producing things with him pretty shortly thereafter, and his brother, Matt Gielen, just making our own stuff. And at that point, it was really to serve me as an actor, I think. And but I started liking kind of being all around a lot more. I felt like playing one note on a piano was me as an actor, and now I have the full keyboard available to me to kind of have my influence on it and on the story as much as possible.
I remember before I started getting involved with film, because I, like you, went to acting school. It was very theatrically based. So when I was first on sets, I had no idea what all these people did. And I'd see credits in the movies and they just go on and on and on. I'm like, what's a gaffer? Who's a best boy? What a weird title. But none of them registered as anything meaningful. That's a good description, kind of one note as opposed to the full keyboard. But just to help people kind of understand, and we're going to get to how the project that we're working on now has been unique from typically what you see. What does a producer on a film do?
I like to think of it, if anyone's familiar with the theater world, as like most similar to what is perhaps maybe the stage manager. You kind of, as the producer, make everything happen. You make the people talk to each other. They need to talk to each other. The director talk to the director of photography, to the costumes, to the to make sure everyone's having those important communications, and then also setting up whatever needs to be set up for the shoot to happen.
Do you remember the first time you worked with Believe within the bleeding disorders community, and do you have any particular impressions or takeaways from that experience?
The first couple Powering It Through events were in New York, and I was bartending there, and that's right. That's when I met a number of the New York, at least, members of the community, and yeah, that was cool. And I got to hear some stories too, because I was very familiar with your story, but there's so many stories out there in this community. There's a lot of hardships that people go through, and listening to those were incredible. And I also got to listen to Val Baez speak, and he can put things really eloquently, and was really, I was really enthralled by everyone's story, and was like, oh wow, this is cool. I was like, when I feel like I'm part of the community, because I do kind of feel like as an unaffected sibling, I do kind of feel that maybe I'm kind of like left behind in the community, or I'm second fiddle maybe. But there's so many people that now I see them at, whether we're at conferences or whatever, and they're running up and giving me hugs, and we're catching up on stuff, and I'm like, oh, this is great. I feel like I'm included, and I think it was funny too when I realized to not just my close family members, but to further, like my grandparents or maybe uncles I don't talk to often, I'm sitting there explaining bleeding disorders and all the common questions, and rolling my eyes when you get the paper cut thing,
that's how I think you made it. When you're rolling your eyes at the paper cut question, that's when you're in.
Yeah, exactly.
I was just at a barbecue this weekend and ended up talking about bleeding disorders as well. And you do end up explaining, or it comes up, you bring it up, even though you're not affected with it.
Yeah, we had this funny moment at base camp where Chris got to go talk to, and I wish I got to film it too, but unfortunately doctors are really particular about being filmed, and they were not interested. But we were going to meet the doctors at base camp just to say, hey, I'm Chris, this is my face. If you see me come in and I'm unconscious, I'm the hemophiliac who needs factor. And this is who I am, and this is my general regimen, and kind of talking to them about that. And they were interested in the film and started asking me a few questions about the documentary while I was sitting there. And this doctor said, oh, well, we really don't have a hemophilia community in Nepal. It's not a problem we have here. And Chris and I were like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I got really defensive. I was like, I have that is statistically totally wrong. But
we just spent a week with them.
Yeah, I was like a little kind of bulldogish about it. Chris was really eloquent. He's a really kind of very poised and eloquent guy, and just kind of made a very nice explanation. I was ready to jump the guy. Right. It's like, you know what you're talking about.
Rob's gonna take his license away. You can't practice medicine anymore, sir.
Yeah.
So let's transition to start talking a little more about the documentary and the project now. And you mentioned earlier feeling as though the title of Base Camp Expert is a very fair one, given the amount of time that you spent dedicated to Base Camp. So to train for that, tell us a little bit, are you a mountaineer? Are you a climber? How did you train for it? Give us a little bit of understanding of that.
I guess mostly mentally, I trained for it just my whole life. I grew up in the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia, and so I was always hiking and backpacking and everything with my dad, and I've done a bunch of backpacking trips, even just by myself. When I lived in New York, I would go out all the time. The Appalachian Trail is actually very close to New York, and would just go out for a couple days. And so I've got lots of experience camping, being out in the woods, being out for extended periods of time. So that I kind of had on lock, thankfully, already, because it was a long time to be laying on the ground and sleeping in a tent that, shakes in the wind, or anytime an avalanche comes down or stuff like that. There was a lot of things to prepare for that specific thing. So,
and just because you can say it so casually because you know what you're talking about, but when an avalanche comes down, that happens constantly up there, right?
Yeah.
But it's not always the catastrophic thing we think of. People like me who've never gotten close to a mountain like that, hear avalanche and think oh, complete and utter devastation, but that's not necessarily the case.
No, yeah, I mean, it devastated everything in its path, but thankfully we just weren't in it.
Fair enough.
We were right next to it. So yeah, they happen all the time. I mean, I don't even know, like, depending on the day, they could be, anywhere from like 10 to 20 a day.
What does that sound like? What does that look like?
It sounds very loud. I don't even know. Like, it sounds, first off, you hear like a cannon, like a big explosion. You just hear this like boom, and then this like growing roar, and then you kind of like pop out of the tent and kind of look around to see where it is. At first, of course, and then like, when you're used to it, you just kind of sit there and roll your eyes. But yeah, and then you try to see where it is, and you watch it kind of come down, and then a lot of times the dust would just kind of blow in. The kind of like snow and ice, like crystals, would just kind of blow in through camp, and
The first one, was it very startling?
The first one, I was actually just really excited. I'd heard that they come down all the time and that you should expect it. But yeah, when I saw the first one, I was like, whoa. And, I ran out of the tent and was that guy, I feel like the guy in the war movies, who like the first time they hear a gunshot, he's like, oh, and freaks out. And the old timers are like, yeah, whatever. And that was definitely like the inverse of me. I was super excited in the beginning, and then I rolled my eyes.
Day 47.
Day 47. I was like, I'm ready to be done with these avalanches, honestly.
And for Chris up there and his rhymes and rhythms, give us a sense of, while you were doing the work that you were there to do, what was Chris and what was his team there to do? And maybe in this answer too, giving us a little bit of information about who all was on his team, what these quote unquote teams look like. So
basically, when you're there, and Chris mentions this a lot actually while I was filming him, you don't do much. And as opposed to other climbs when you can just keep going up and down, if you have to do acclimatization rotations to acclimatize yourself, and then you kind of do it in these waves. You push a little higher, and then you push a little higher, and then you come back down, and then you wait, and then you do your summit push, which is essentially what you do at Everest. But the problem is you're much more at the mercy of weather there, and you just can't climb when the weather's dangerous. You can't. And so there is just a lot of waiting. I think out of those 47 days, they climbed 16 days or something like that off the top of my head. So,
and these teams, are they how large are they or small? Who's on them? And tell us about Chris's in particular.
Yeah. So, Chris's team was a much smaller team than usual. This was actually something they had a problem with on the mountain, where these guide companies that would bring tons of people. I mean, and just accept anyone who didn't have experience. So the camp next to us, for example, had about 100 climbers, and Chris's had 6. So it was much more intimate with the guide, much more relationship with the guide, because Chris's guide, Ryan Waters, was fantastic, and he's like one of the best there. And
they've got a bit of a history too, right?
Right. So Chris and Ryan have climbed together on Aconcagua and Carson's Peak in Indonesia. They didn't climb together at this climb, but he arranged the peak in Russia, which is slipping my mind. But yeah, so he and Chris have this history, and Chris obviously trusts him very much, especially because he keeps these small teams and everything's very focused. So
he knows a fair amount about, or what he needs to know about Chris's hemophilia. He knows how to infuse Chris if need be. So that intimacy allows him to be, a caretaker if and when that ever came up on the mountain.
Yeah, so he's had practice on other trips before infusing Chris, and he also would carry a factor sock, as we called it, a wool sock stuffed with factor, stuffed down your clothes to stay warm. Ryan would keep a factor sock on him as well, just in case something happened to Chris. I think Ryan may have infused him twice at base camp. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, he's very familiar with it and knows how to take care of Chris if need be. Yeah, and he kept saying, like, Chris was like, oh, you pick one of these ones in my hand, whichever one you want. And Ryan's like, I don't feel comfortable with this exactly. Like, I'll do it, but I don't feel comfortable. So I'm picking that huge one in your arm. And Chris is like, oh, I don't like to use that. And he's like, well, you're going to be unconscious. So
do we have that on camera?
I think so. Yeah.
There's huge production challenges with trying to pull off something like this. So without getting too in the weeds on industry talk, can you give people a little insight? Like, as a producer, we kind of like broker all these different connections and relationships, make sure everything's happening. But with something like this, and particularly the filming on Everest, how was that different, and what did you have to do to make that work?
Typically, the producer doesn't film the movie, so there's that. I was the camera, sound guy. I was ingesting all the footage. I was the everything there. And to start with, there's no electricity company at base camp, so you have to rely on solar power. So I had a solar panel and a large solar generator I brought up with me. The solar generators are these deep cell batteries that can retain the solar power and then convert it to AC electricity for you. And for starters, you would get some direct sunlight during the day, but maybe just a couple hours. So when I was planning on it, I was like, oh, this will be easy, thinking that it's perfectly sunny all day, every day, which it is not there. It snows a lot. It snows almost every afternoon. And then some days we would have a blizzard where it would snow for 3 days on end and there'd be no sun. So that was my first challenge, was trying to figure out, okay, all my cool gadgets run on power. How do I do this? And I would have to like rotate batteries and think, okay, today I can charge a couple camera batteries. They suck about this much juice. And then I can charge maybe a couple of the sound batteries to power the microphone. And then tomorrow I'm going to have to dump cards, which means I'm going to have to hook up my computer and the hard drives to the electricity, which sucks so much electricity, and then dump all the footage from the cards that the camera uses. Otherwise, I'm not going to have any free card space to film anything anymore. And then I'm definitely going to have to finish charging all the camera batteries the day after that. And that's assuming I get the sunlight I want. If I don't, then I'm going to have to pivot. So it was like things like that, like some like juggling, battery math that was my first big challenge. And then also, the first morning when I woke up at base camp and my camera was completely encased in ice. It's very humid up there, which I didn't realize. I always associate winter with being very dry. And so I never thought of this being a problem, but it's actually incredibly humid up there. It's about 100% humidity every day, but you just don't really feel the humidity because it's extremely cold. But at night, as soon as the sun goes down, ice starts to form on every surface of anything. And I would wake up and my camera would just be entombed. And so I'd have to take it down, and we had a propane heater, and I would just hold it over the heater for a little bit and just thaw it out literally. And then I would have the batteries. Anyone who's maybe taken their cell phone on a ski trip might figure out that your cell phone does not work in the cold because the battery doesn't work in the cold. So I would have these batteries shoved down my sleeping bag with me at night. And I would like pull those out and then shove it in the camera and flip it on, and it would work. And my laptop would freeze over too. That freaked me out. I knew the camera could withstand the weather and the water and all that kind of stuff. But when I woke up and my laptop was on ice, I had an extreme panic attack. But it thawed out.
You made your laptops Everest proof?
Yeah, somehow. I did not anticipate that one. And when I saw that my laptop had a case of ice on it, I was like, well, that's done. That's an expensive piece of nothing now.
Well, out of all the people I know, to take on this producer role and direct and film and, all the many aspects and facets of what you did up there, you're perfect for it. Like your ever hyperactive monkey mind was able to pivot and to do all this, and that's cool. Like hearing about it is, I can totally picture it.
Thank you. Yeah, monkey mind.
We had an awesome time talking with you a couple nights ago about like your personal experience up there, and you had told us some stories about Sherpas and your just your experience meeting them and their role and your relationship with them. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I was excited to meet Sherpa people to begin with. I've always watched Everest documentaries as a kid. I love like mountain documentaries and any sort of cool climbing stuff, any extreme thing where people are just absolutely miserable while they're filming it. I love to watch. And so I was very familiar with like the Sherpa people in that aspect and their history and all of that. But I was looking forward to meeting them. But when I met them, I wasn't prepared to really be just totally amazed by how just impressive human beings they are. I don't know how to describe it better than that. Their religion is kind of classically this form of Tibetan Buddhism, and they are just some of the most giving and caring and patient, just as a character, impressive people. They I got to spend a lot of time with him when Chris would go up on the mountain because there'd be no one else at base camp. I was just hanging out with these guys, and some of them spoke English better than others. So I would kind of ask some questions, and they would teach me some Sherpa, which is fun, which is they call it Sherpa, but it's mostly Nepali with a little bit of, their own personal stuff to it. But I was really amazed. We got caught off guard pretty early on in the trip with this famous climber named Uli Steck, who died. I think he was the first death, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's how I remember it too.
Yeah, and so when he died, the guys were talking about it because his body landed pretty much right in front of our Sherpa team when they were doing a rotation, taking some gear. They had just taken some gear up to one of the camps where Chris was, and were on their way back down to get some more gear because they're just these beasts of these humans. They could carry so much stuff and up in these extreme environments. They're incredible shape, and they and so his body landed right near where they were, and so when they came back down that night and were hanging out with me, they were kind of processing it, but unlike any people I've ever seen, they were just so embracing of the moment and this awful thing that happened. They had so much space in their hearts to accept it and to feel all the emotions, conflicting emotions certainly, because that can, even though Uli was doing a very different kind of climbing than they were doing, like that's everyone's worry is something goes wrong and you die on the mountain, and yet they were having all these conflicting emotions going on, and were just feeling all of them equally and passionately and without any sort of judgment to themselves and without any sort of like filter, I guess. There was no self-image there. It was just willingness to embrace whatever happened with compassion, and I was just so impressed by it. I was terrified when I heard that it happened, and then I watched them process it and was so impressed.
You mentioned how Uli was not doing what Chris was doing. Mm-hmm. If you could just say a little bit about what Uli was doing that kind of made him was particularly dangerous and led to his death, and talk a little about Chris's process and approach to mountain climbing in general, and particularly to Everest.
So Uli was there. He had done Everest, I'm sure numerous times, but he was doing. He was training himself for a non-supplemental oxygen-assisted summit of, I believe he was trying to do Lhotse, and which is right next to Everest and almost as tall, Lhotse and Everest inside 24 hours.
Which is crazy, right?
It's insane. Yeah, people. In fact, there was one famous climber, his name's escaping me, but who attempted to do Everest in 24 hours, just Everest in 24 hours this year without oxygen. I think he summited, and I think he made it in 27 hours, which is still insane. Like to do Everest without oxygen is nuts in the first place. You risk dying, but you also risk, you're probably going to lose fingers and toes at that point because your body stops sending oxygen there. And
there's a certain point, right, in the climb.
They call it the death zone, where your body starts to consume itself to regain oxygen that it has sent places.
Just oxygen or blood too,
So it stops, sending blood there too, yeah. So your fingers and toes just start dying right off. Tip of your nose, like all that kind of stuff just starts dying, like any sort of non-essential function. And so he was training himself. Uli was training himself for that, and to just get himself in extreme cardiovascular shape, he was doing ice climbing on, I believe it was Lhotse, I can't remember, this little peak in between Lhotse and Everest. And his guide had gotten frostbite because, they're doing this without oxygen. He had one guide who he was going and doing these training climbs with, and he was going to be doing this full climb with. But he was down with frostbite and was taking it easy. And so he was like, well, Uli's still going to go out and climb that day. And so he went out and was ice climbing without a rope, totally unassisted, without any help. And, people don't know exactly what happened, but, it's kind of obvious he must have just fell somehow, missed
He was super vulnerable.
Yeah, didn't set his ice pick hard enough for whatever it was, and fell. So Chris, first off, was not doing any ice climbing. They were mountaineering. They were climbing. They had crampons on, and they were on ice almost the entire time. But they have these fixed ropes that some climbers had fixed, and they were, always on these tethered to these fixed ropes. And there was climbing, as far as like you're hiking up something very steep, and occasionally your hands have to get involved, but you're not sticking an ice pick in a wall and then pulling yourself up, and then sticking an ice pick in a wall and pulling yourself up.
That's supporting your entire body weight.
Right, correct, yeah. If you fall, you're likely to just fall to the ground, which is right under your feet. You're not going to fall thousands of feet down to the ground at some points. Other points it was pretty steep on the side, but yeah. So Chris, however, was very, what struck me was just how passionate not only he was about climbing in general and just being outside in general, but passionate about doing it correctly.
But just talking about how methodical Chris is, you told a story since you've been home that I think is so indicative of Chris's personality and just how highly structured and, like you said, doing things correctly, how much that's important to him. And it had to do with the coffee and the timing of making coffee and a timer for the coffee. Would you mind sharing that story for the listeners?
Yeah, and I'm happy to also throw a couple other people under the bus here. So Chris, who now works for Gut Monkey, so this is like community people we can throw under the bus, with Pat Torrey and Joe Torrey. Apparently, he has been going to Portland and hanging with these guys. And in Portland, they care a lot about their coffee, like too much about their coffee, because it rains all the time, and so they're miserable. And so they have to get this coffee in them to make them feel good.
That's the state reasoning for why they drink a lot of coffee. It rains all the time in Oregon, so they're miserable and must drink coffee. That's
what I hear, yeah.
Okay.
And so Chris had all these rules about how French press works, and made us set alarms.
And he was not a big coffee drinker prior to this, right?
I don't know, but he now is. And now, or at least now, because I was using Nescafe every day, because like a French press has a lot of steps and then a lot of waiting too. And Nescafe is instant coffee that you put in hot water and then you just stir it, which is fantastic. There's like 2 steps between me and coffee. And I'm certainly not setting an alarm and waiting and just looking at the coffee sitting there in something and not drinking it. It just seems really ridiculous to me. And so, yeah, there's a little bit of contention there. And I was unfortunately in the minority. Everyone he would, no, hold on. I will say, when you make it with the French press, Chris would do it the whole thing, and with the proper amount of scoops and all that stuff. It tasted fantastic, but it took forever, and everyone was like on his side about it though. They tasted great, and they were like, "Oh man, Chris, you make it so good," which just kind of frustrated me, because I was like, I'm just happy with this Nescafe situation. It just is so easy. I'm drinking coffee, and I'm almost done with my coffee by the time you guys get your first coffee. And so I was unfortunately the one getting made fun of, even though I felt like I was doing the right thing.
Not an easy position to be in. I just like the idea of the guy on Everest who's standing watching the coffee being made because there isn't much else to do.
Yeah.
Just making sure someone's always setting a timer, and that's a big concern for the guy climbing Mount Everest. I think that says a lot about how methodical he really is.
Yeah, and I'll say I'm glad you pointed out on Everest, because it was so cold. You would wake up in the morning and you would just get dressed and you're just miserable. It took so long to get awake because you're just so cold. And to sit there and look at coffee and not drink it was so hard to do. I don't think I could do it anymore. And I think that's why I was like, I don't get this French press stuff, and you're an alien to me, and nobody sided with me, unfortunately.
So you referenced earlier how there was a moment where Chris was considering turning around, and I'd love you to share that story and share it in the context of just describing to us the summit day, the day that finally it's happening. Give us the story of Summit Day.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'll share really quickly too. There was actually 2 points where Chris was thinking about turning around. I think it was on day 3 of their summit push, which takes a couple days, which I'll get into in a second. They were at Camp 3, and Chris was having some really bad stomach issues and was really uncomfortable. And was just, and anyone who's had stomach issues, I'll just leave it at that, knows how weak you can feel. And this is not a place where you can afford to feel weak and just debilitated. And he was considering turning around then, but thankfully he went to bed that night and was like, if I wake up and I feel like this tomorrow, then I'm just going to walk down. And woke up, didn't feel like that, kept going. So that was good story number one. And good story number two happened when they were on what's called the South Summit. When Chris saw that for the first time, it's a very, very, very steep and narrow place where you have enough space to walk with your feet in a single file line. You know, there's no like walking with your feet parallel to each other like they normally are, and like your feet want to. There's walking with one foot in front of the other, and that's it. And then on either side of you is, you know, the side of the face of the planet. If you fall all the way down, and you fall for a very long time, and it's scary, and there's wind that's blowing. It's just not a fun place to be exhausted, you know, and certainly not a place where you'd feel safe being exhausted. And when you're making the summit push, this is currently on day 4 of the push, if you can call it day 4, because what happens is the summit of Everest is very far from base camp, and the first day you do a big climb up to camp, all the way to camp 2, so much so that you take a rest day on day 2 just to make sure you can reserve up some energy, because then you start getting high, and when you get high up, you also are losing oxygen, and a lot of it. So they then went to camp 3 on day 3, and from camp 3 went to camp 4, and at camp 4 you're on oxygen. It's not really that safe for you to not be on oxygen. You're just below the death zone where you can't be off oxygen safely at all, because your body will start killing itself. So you're very high up, and even the supplemental oxygen these guys are on, you aren't breathing sea level air anymore. It's not like you take a breath from the oxygen mask and you can go like pick up stuff and be normal again. You know, this is enough oxygen to last you 18 hours, and anyone who's scuba dived with a tank on their back knows you have about maybe an hour and a half or something like that. So the oxygen level is really low. It's it's called supplemental oxygen. It's to help, but it's certainly not to, like, you know, superpower you up the mountain. And there'd just be no way to carry that much, you know? And so you only really take a nap at camp 4, because at this point, camp 4, you reach it on day 4. And I think they got in sometime like around 3 in the afternoon. And then you take a nap. And at about 10 p.m., they started climbing for the summit, because it takes about 18 hours round trip to go to the summit from camp 4. And so just timing wise, it's the safest to leave, you know, in the evening, late evening, so that you're summiting around, you know, I think Chris summited at 9:59 a.m. So it was 12 hours before Chris even made it to the summit. And then it was another 8 hours back down, or 6 hours, excuse me, back down to camp 4 from there. It's just a long day. And you're also at the top of the world, not getting a lot of oxygen. You haven't slept the night before because you were walking up, you know, a very steep mountain. And then, you know, he saw the South Ridge in front of him, this really, really dangerous ridge, and had a moment of panic and also just sheer exhaustion. And looked at it and was like, I can't do it. I can't do it, you know? And that kind of speaks to, one, just how rough it is. It's just so hard, but also, you know, just how smart and ultimately safety concerned Chris is. He's not going to go up there if he's feeling exhausted, because this is one of the most dangerous parts of the climb. And Tashi, who is the Sherpa assigned to Chris, Tashi was actually the head guide of the Sherpa team, and was just the coolest, funniest, nicest guy. Such an enjoyable, like, enthusiastic sense of humor, and also so knowledgeable. Was so knowledgeable. He's a professional climber himself. Like, he just climbs everywhere and is like just fit and strong, and gets in front of Chris. And you know, I mentioned earlier, when you're climbing up Everest, there's these fixed ropes that you're tethered to. You know, you have a climbing harness on, and these ropes are anchored into the ice. And then you just have like a short rope about the length of your arm with a carabiner on it. That's your safety line that's attached to the ropes. And so Tashi unclipped his, walked in front of Chris, and gave him this really touching speech about, hey, you know, you can do this. Don't get scared. You've got the energy. You've got the you know, the skill to do this, and you've got a mission. and reminded him of his hemophilia mission. And then kind of in a tough love, showing of tough love, he clipped his carabiner back to the ropes in front of Chris and hooked Chris's carabiner inside his when he did so, and then just started walking and pulled Chris along. And
challenge by choice ish.
Ish, yeah. And Chris was super thankful for it initially because eventually because it got him moving again. And when he got up to the south summit, realized that he could do it. And they came up over the final ridge of the Hillary Step and saw the summit. And that's when he said finally that he believed he could do it again, because he came up over and realized the summit's like a couple hundred yards away, and he's like, wait a minute, I've got the energy to make it there. It's only right there. I just got to keep on going a little bit, and was able to push through it.
Just incredible. Just absolutely incredible. How did Chris's hemophilia play into and not play into this entire experience?
Well, so there's lots of cold, high altitude infusions, which was fun. I made Chris do it outside a bunch because it just looks prettier than doing it inside a tent, with Mount Everest in the background, infusing.
That's what I appreciate. But I appreciate that about you. You know the healthcare stuff, but you also know the production stuff.
Yeah.
You know the things that we got to push for.
Yeah, like, Chris, you've infused outside before. Come on, go. Just sit on this rock and do it for me really quick, even though the wind's blowing. And he's like, my veins are freezing. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but this looks so good. It's beautiful, man. Just keep going. But yeah, I think that was the only, as far as the infusion challenges go. But the other was just that, it's just so hard to find a warm vein. Thankfully, because you're just chugging so much water there to deal with the altitude so that your blood is, able to circulate quickly and bring oxygen around your body quickly. You're just very hydrated. So in a warm environment, his veins would have been just, pipes. But as soon as you walk outside, everything just goes. And so finding a vein was difficult sometimes. But other than that, it was no more than any sort of other infusion challenges. The altitude didn't really play an effect at all. And thankfully, Chris also has never had any joint problems, or at least major ones. So as far as climbing goes, he's really lucky there. He didn't have any sort of target joints to watch out for. To worry about, getting a bleed in up high or something like that.
So then fast forwarding to when he gets back from the summit and you guys get back to Kathmandu a few days later, you were met by a delegation from the Nepal Hemophilia Society, people that we had spent the week with. There's that great now emblematic photo, which is actually a screen grab from our footage of Chris up there with the Save One Life flag that has all the various members' signatures on it. What was that interaction between Chris and the community when they were reunited in Kathmandu?
Man, they were so first off, Chris was just totally wasted, exhausted. Just absolutely spent. Chris came down off the mountain just so tired, and so tired that 2 nights of sleep doesn't fix anything. Tired, and so when we got back to Kathmandu that morning, both he and I were tired, but he was just exhausted. And so he's like, I feel so bad. They're coming to greet me, and I feel like I could just fall asleep and sleep for days right now. I'm so excited to see them, but I'm almost embarrassed by how sleepy I am and just, how spent I am, both physically and mentally. And, but then, they showed up, and the Hemophilia Society in Nepal, they're such good people, and they were so excited to see Chris and so happy for him. They'd all been following along on Facebook and were so looking forward to this moment that the energy was just infectious. I perked right up, and I know Chris did too. It was just so flattering. It was so humbling. And, and then we all were taking pictures together, and I was getting so frustrated because, I'm not frustrated, but, as a filmmaker, I have to kind of have some sort of journalistic view of this, right? I have to stay back from everything and film the moments. I can't participate in the moments, but they all wanted pictures with me as well, and they kept bringing me in. They're like, Rob, come on, you're part of this. And I was like, no, I'm filming it. Leave me alone. I'll take pictures after. But they didn't listen. They pulled me right in, and we were all smiling and taking photos together. It was just so cool. They made us promise to come back and visit again, and I want to take them up on that. I absolutely have to see those people again. They're some of the coolest people I've ever met, and it was just such a warm reception. And also the first people that got to congratulate Chris for this, because I congratulated him at base camp, but he didn't want to see me anymore. We've been hanging out for too long at that point. Everyone else was part of the expedition. And so this is the first people we saw who, Chris got to say, yeah, I just summited Everest, and see the reaction in person. It was a really, really exciting moment that we didn't really think about beforehand, how exciting that would be. Yeah.
So I guess the question I have is there anything from all of this that struck you as, man, like you were just saying, I never would have anticipated that thing, or a takeaway that was completely unexpected that now seems like an integral part of the way you will think about this experience going forward? Is there anything like that at all that you just could not possibly have expected but now won't be able to forget?
This sounds almost silly in hindsight to say this, but I didn't expect what was fanatical enthusiasm and support to be at like that fever pitch for the entire thing. I thought for sure, when I was posting for Chris about the summit push, and Chris is summiting today, hopefully, assuming everything goes well, and I assumed there'd be a lot of traction around that, but I didn't anticipate like how feverish it was and how just so excited the entire worldwide hemophilia community would be. There's people sending things from just every country you could think of, and people who had never met Chris, who had never heard of Chris before this, were making videos and sending all sorts of showings of support from such an early point that the initial fundraiser that Chris was trying to get pushed through, trying to get all the kids on the Save One Life list sponsored, happened before the summit push even happened. And so he's like, well, we got to start raising some money or something here. This is crazy how like the amount of support and the amount of just comments and everything coming in that everyone was saying and following along with was just so cool. And I totally took a piece of that with me, just because we'd been, as you said, working on this project for a long time, and so I was really, really, in moments where I was having to deal with a frozen camera or like a solar panel that wouldn't charge my stuff, I was so re-energized by that support indirectly, because I realized how cool of a thing we were doing. And it kept reminding me every day when notifications on my phone were popping up from Chris's account saying, oh my God, this, and people were commenting like crazy and sharing and all that stuff. God, it kept me enthused and excited when, I'm waiting 4 minutes for Chris's coffee to brew and stuff like that. And I'm cold and I would just want to drink coffee now. It was so helpful.
Well, thank you for sharing it here. Even more so, thank you for your willingness, forget your skills, but your willingness to take on this extraordinarily unique role, to stop all other aspects of your life to do so. If this doesn't make you an adopted member, unaffected sibling in the community, then nothing ever will, because very few people have committed to the community to the degree that you have in just the last couple of months, let alone the last couple of years. So thank you for this and for everything that you've done for this community, Rob.
Hey, thank you for the opportunity. I love telling stories, and getting to camp outside while I tell them is just like, for me, like, that's it. It was fantastic. And what a cool experience to be such a part of. So I feel like I'm the lucky one there. So thank you.
Well, that was the bet, because Lord knows it wasn't going to be me on the mountain. So that was the bet. All right. Thanks again, Rob.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, and we are winding third, approaching home base on episode 13 here of the BloodStream podcast, wrapping up with our parting shots for this week's episode. One final thought, bleeding disorders related or otherwise, to leave you with as we depart. Natalie Lynch, what is your parting shot for this episode?
My parting shot is actually a thank you to you.
Wow.
On Honeymoon, I had an unexpected injury where I was bedridden for a couple days, and you took really good care of me, and it was a nice change of, rolls, and I was dealing with a lot of pain, and so much pain that we had to have a chiropractor come to the hotel to treat me.
That seems particularly like it's very rare in life. You're in a Las Vegas hotel and a traveling chiropractor comes through the door. I don't know what that means, but I feel like it's a mile marker of some kind.
But I felt like, you were doing anything and everything there was to like help stop the pain, even though there was really no stopping it. And, it was nice to be, it wasn't nice to be on the receiving end, but I felt so grateful to have you.
Well, thank you for that. And it's interesting being on the other side of someone else's pain and such extraordinary pain that really nothing helps. And I've experienced that before as a camp counselor, most notably with kids when they go into, who have sickle cell disease and go into a pain crisis. Yes, you get a heating pack on and you hydrate and try to find like a comfortable sitting position. But those are all like just trying to dig at the margins of the pain. There's so little that you can actually do. And it's a very helpless feeling, but it's just staying present and staying alert and just being there and remembering this alone is valuable. And you have to just get over your own feelings of like uselessness, because there's nothing you can really do except be there. But I'm glad that being there stood out. And that was part of the vows, so...
we got to test them early.
Yeah, give them a little test run before we, buy it. Give it a little test drive around the lot. Well, thank you for that. That's very sweet.
And what's your parting shot?
My parting shot is that I just got back from... I actually put this out on Twitter and Facebook this morning. But I'm just recently back from Indonesia, which is the world's largest Muslim majority country. And Muslims don't always get a great reputation in our country and are what's the word I'm looking for? Discriminated against, frankly. And I just want to say that my experience in first time I'd ever been in a Muslim. Well, no, I guess that's not true. I think Senegal is as well, or it's primarily Muslim. But Indonesia is like, hey, capital of Muslimdom, and everyone that we met was full of generosity and love and kindness. None of the ugly stereotypes that are made. Didn't witness anything of that sort. And that's not to say there aren't bad people in the world. There's bad people in the world who come from all different places in the world, have all different religious beliefs. But my first experience being that immersed in Muslim culture and asking questions and being curious and touring a mosque and was fantastic. And I wouldn't hesitate to go to a Muslim majority country ever again. And I hope that more and more people who experience and have positive interactions with people of Muslim backgrounds or Muslim faith are willing to share their positive experience, because I think that's important to counter some of the negatives that get thrown around. So that's what I'm thinking about, and that's my parting shot for episode 13. I want to once again and one final time for this episode thank Shire for being the exclusive sponsor and making this episode of the BloodStream podcast possible. And with that is all for this episode. Don't forget to check out the BloodStreamMedia.com website and to subscribe to Ask the Expert, the Powering Through podcast, and the Bloodline podcast to hear all of BloodStream Media's podcasts for the bleeding disorders community. You have a question for Ask the Expert or an idea for a future episode of BloodStream? Email us at mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com. You can also find us on facebook.com/BloodStreamMedia and on Twitter @BloodStreamInfo. This episode of BloodStream was written by Patrick James Lynch and Natalie Lynch, produced by Patrick James Lynch, Ryan Gielen, Rob Bradford, Andrew Gall, Josh Bragg, Ava Friedman, and Colby Crow, and the BloodStream podcast is edited by Mr. Andrew Gall. Special thanks to everyone at Believe Limited, the National Hemophilia Foundation, the Hemophilia Alliance, and special thanks as well to our sit-down guest, Mr. Rob Bradford. Reminder to check out the program notes for this episode in your podcast player of choice or on bloodstreampod.com for links and additional information about the various stories featured on this episode. My name is Patrick James Lynch.
And I'm Natalie Lynch.
And until next time, take self-care of yourself.